I think Roberto Carlos. I was every time I watch him play, I come away so impressed. You know, those shooting sequences aside, which by the way are obviously they seem to be good things, whatever they are. um, I was thinking about this today, and I tweeted it. Watching this game, we don't have stats for this, but I want to know, like, first of all, like assists. We only started tracking assists at a certain point, so we don't have assists all the time. So we don't really know, like, in addition to the goals that Di Stefano and Puskás scored, God, Lord knows how many assists they had as well. But so we don't have assists all the time. But I was thinking about, like, where would Roberto Carlos ranked, if not in assists, just in pure goal involvements in Champions League finals? He had the assist to Mijatovic in this game. And then in Valencia 2 years later, against Valencia 2 years later in Paris in the final, he had a free kick which eventually led to Morientes' goal. He had the throw-in which led to McManaman's goal. That's two there. In the Champions League final against Leverkusen 2 years later, he had the throw-in to Raul where he scored. He had the famous assist to Zidane, which is not not as famous as the goal, obviously. But actually, did you see there was a social media thing recently? I think it was a few days ago. I don't know if it made the rounds, but I just saw it on Instagram myself, where it was the anniversary of Zidane's goal against Leverkusen at some point recently, and Real Madrid posted Zidane's goal on Instagram rather, and somebody commented about Roberto Carlos's assists and, like, it's not really an assist. Zidane did it, and then and Roberto Carlos replied to that guy and was like, basically, this was an amazing assist. It was calculated, and
Yeah.
yeah,
And he stuck. I mean, I didn't see that, but I know that Roberto Carlos has always stuck to his guns, and that he did see Zidane at the top of the box and played it into him on purpose, and in that sense, it's a very good assist that he set up the way he did. Obviously,
yeah.
Zidane had a lot of work to do, but yeah, I mean, Roberto Carlos has always been quite insistent that he played a role in his role in that goal. In terms of assists all time, it would be interesting. I imagine Di Stefano and Puskás, between the two of them, must have racked up an insane number of goal involvements in that regard.
Probably in that one game against Frankfurt, they did it all in that one night.
Well, I was just thinking, 1960 they scored 7 goals in the final, and then 1962 they scored another 3, and Puskás scored. God, I think he got a hat trick against Benfica, and I think he got 4 against
Frankfurt.
Another hat, Frankfurt. So 7 of them. So it's just, I imagine the numbers for them are crazily inflated. The only other player, I think in the modern era, the only other player I can think of is Modric. Like the assist to Ronaldo in 2017, then the assist to Ramos in 2014.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I have a feeling that he might have been involved in Casemiro's kind of long range shot against Juve as well.
Maybe.
So I mean, I'd have to look back into it, but yeah, Modric is a similar case. But yeah, I mean, yeah,
Marcelo too, maybe.
Yeah, Marcelo's another one, and then obviously you have to say Ramos himself, having scored in 2 finals, is probably kind of in a similar bracket. But yeah, I mean, I hadn't really thought of it, to be honest. I did definitely in that first goal in 2002, Carlos throwing the ball in passes me by. I don't think on the coverage of it you really see it until the replay. I think, if I remember correctly, the camera catches Raul kind of late on in that run.
Maybe. I can't remember that part. But I guess the answer to this conversation, regardless, is that it's whatever the status is probably dominated by Real Madrid players. Where are you on Roberto Carlos versus Marcelo?
Well, I mean, I think with my interest in history, the 90s and kind of early 2000s passes me by a little.
Yeah, you went a little bit too hipster. Your era's...
Yeah, I decided if I was going to do Real Madrid history, I was really going to do Real Madrid history and just like go to 10,000 BC and stuff like that, you know? But I mean, I suppose watching Roberto Carlos, I looked up and have to be honest, I didn't realize that he was at the club to 2007, which was striking to me. I'd have to see how exactly he performed across that. I mean, the fact that he was there to '07 isn't going to mean much. I mean, even Marcelo himself, I think, with the way things are trending, we're probably going to see Marcelo, and people will be surprised by if Marcelo leaves this year or next, because his involvement in the team is much more kind of ended about 4 years ago now. So yeah, I mean, it's hard. Yeah, it's difficult, very difficult. I suppose recency bias is always going to make me say Marcelo, and I've seen so much more of him as well. But yeah, I mean, when you watch games like this, you definitely have to say, and it's the same with Sanchez and Hierro, just how insane that Real Madrid were able to just go from one era to the next in terms of positions. Obviously, the forward position when the number 7, that is pretty well established, but at centre back as well, moving from Sanchez to Hierro and then Roberto Carlos to Marcelo is just, it's obscene, really.
Yeah, I think, by the way,
you'd have to preface that with Marcelo not really establishing himself in the team until later on. I mean, he joined not long after Roberto Carlos either left or was in the process of leaving, but he didn't really establish himself in the team properly, I think, until around La Decima.
That, and he had a earlier decline than I thought he was going to have. Yeah. So he had a very amazing peak, but I think he started late, and I would have liked his peak to be a little bit longer than it was. Roberto Carlos did not have a great peak either. It was a pretty, you could see the decline, and he was around for a long time. I mean, people forget he was part of that Capello league winning side too. I don't know if he made it to Schuster 2007 now that I recall, but well, he must have, yeah, because Marcelo was there too. So this, in my book, Chris, this was the hardest one I had to settle. I didn't like it was. I don't want to spoil who I eventually settled on, but I will say that whatever it wasn't like absolutely set in stone. And I think this one is a little bit subjective. And what I can't stand is that a lot of people are very, very de facto about it, Marcelo being better. And I really, there's recency bias, which, by the way, that recency bias goes another way too, in that, in these last couple of years, a lot of people are down on Marcelo because of what we remember of him now in the last 2 years.
Yeah, I'm quite surprised by and same with Ramos as well, the attitude change now that their kind of positions in the team have changed as well. I mean, obviously, I more than anybody understand the financial constraints and what getting a transfer fee and getting his wages off the bill could mean for Madrid this summer if they were to get rid of Marcelo. But at the same time, given his kind of track record, if he decides that he just wants to sit out the last year of his contract and take a wage, it's not going to bother me either way. He's kind of contributed to the team enough that I respect him either way. And
he's never caused problems. He's always...
No, never. No. And I know the way Madrid sees its history that people are saying he's ruining his legacy, but I mean, he's had such a successful stint at the club that no one's really, in 10, 20 years time, no one's going to remember Marcelo because he sat on the bench in 2020, 21 or whatever,
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, and the same with Ramos, the kind of contract saga, how much attitudes have changed towards these players when they kind of even hint at going against the team. Which, I mean, I suppose it's nice, and also it's unpleasant because I don't really like having these kind of unpleasant conversations about players that have contributed so much.
Yeah, well, time heals all wounds, or at least it balances out everything in the end. When enough time passes, we remember the peaks of players more than we do the end of their careers, where the fans are just swearing at them and stuff. I guarantee you, all these legends that a lot of these people talk about on Twitter now, if Twitter was around for when they were actually playing, they'd be getting destroyed during that time, including Zidane, including Figo.
It's probably a saving grace that Twitter wasn't around in '98, because I cannot begin to imagine how hysterical people would be if we had having gone 32 years without winning this Champions League, how hysterical they would have been second to second. It'd just be hot take after hot take after hot take. It'd be crazy. One minute Mijatovic would need to come off, the next minute he needs to be the captain. It'd be crazy, absolutely insane. Some of the stuff that would probably come out if Twitter was around.
The one that always gets me is that, like, imagine if it was around for when Santiago Bernabéu signed Puskás after I think it was, what was he? He was 30 something or 30, right?
Yeah, and he was hugely overweight as well.
Fat, 30, and hadn't played in 2 years because of the ban.
Yeah.
Imagine if we signed him and Twitter was around for then. Like what are we doing, wasting our money on this guy?
I'd love to think of, the people posting images, because when he arrived overweight, he was given to, I think it was Villanova or someone like that was in charge. No, it wasn't. It was Carnegie or someone, one of the coaches, one of the many coaches we went through in that year. Bernabéu kind of presented him to the coach, and the coach was like, he's overweight, what am I going to do with him? And Bernabéu just said, that's your problem, get him in shape. So Puskás spent that summer training in, like, I don't know if you ever seen an Aaron sweater jumper, but basically cotton jumpers and with cling film wrapped around his stomach so he'd lose weight to get him in shape. So I can only imagine what Twitter would have reacted to seeing images of this, like our fat old striker running around in a jumper in the middle of Madrid summer, Madrid heat. It'd be hysterics. It'd be very funny anyways.
Have you seen the quote of Puskás recounting that story?
I probably have, but I doesn't come, not on the top of my head. I don't know it.
I've never seen it actually on the internet because I've looked for it, although maybe that's just because I didn't look deep enough, although I looked pretty hard. But the only place I actually saw it, I think, was in Jonathan Wilson's book, where he says, where he's talking about, what's the one, the Hungarian football one, behind the curtain or something like that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So there's this quote where Puskás actually, he says what he said that day when Santiago Bernabéu asked him to play. And this is the quote. I'll just read it because I actually have it. I quoted it in my book. He says, I quote, "I'm too fat. I can't possibly play. I need time to get my weight down. But there I was the very next day in Madrid, the size of a balloon, having a very weird conversation with Bernabéu. There was no interpreter present. He was rabbiting away in Spanish, me in Hungarian. In the end, I threw up my arms and gestured, listen, this is all very well, but have you looked at me? I am 18 kilos overweight. Bernabéu replied, that's not my problem, it's yours. And that was that. I was a Real Madrid player if I'd rather have you one. Bernabéu gave me $5,000 right away, which came in very handy. I didn't cost Real Madrid a penny in transfer fees. I was never bought or sold in my career."
Yeah.
When I read that quote, I was like, this is gold. This should be circulated more.
I'm not sure if it's Phil Ball or Sid Lowe, but one of their brilliant books, which is worth looking into. I'm pretty certain it's White Storm actually, but that Puskás was a Bernabéu signing. The board were willing to pass up on him because of obviously his condition and the fact that a number of high profile sides had also passed up on him. I mean the Hungary Spain communism, the kind of rivalry between Spain and Russia made the transfer very difficult as well. So, I mean that it's just, I suppose it does go to show just how, even at a micro level, how much of an impact Bernabéu has. We've strayed very far from Juve, but I'm happy to roll with it.
Yeah, I don't even know how we got here. I think it was.
I can't remember.
We were talking about what if Twitter was around.
Oh yeah.
And Roberto Carlos versus Marcelo. That's how it originally started. I feel like we didn't get closure on that conversation yet. But so if Twitter was around for this game, it would be a lot of whoever was the Mbappe of that time, we'd be talking about for basically 5 years straight before we won that title. Yeah. And that financial situation then, by the way, under Lorenzo Sanz, Matt Wiltsey and you would be crucified for writing any financial observations on that time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that whole financial stuff and I suppose that's the one blotch on Science's record that as pairs would later discover that the kind of financial health of the club was supremely underreported during his time as president. And it was only, and if Perez had not won the election, God knows what would have happened to the club in terms of a socio model. But I mean, yeah, I mean the stories about, I mean, science was a very hands-on presence in, which I suppose is not an unfamiliar tale from Madristas now. But I mean, I've read stories of him hiding in the bathroom towards the end of this game because he just actually physically could not watch it.
Yeah, yeah. He was and rest in peace. You know, he died during the pandemic, and I remember we were just talking about he was a Madridista to the core, and I love the club, but financially he just didn't really know what he was doing, and he actually, you know, we mentioned earlier in the podcast all the signings he made.
Yeah.
He does have a blip, a very strange blip where he signed Elver Balic for, I think it was, I don't remember the exact figure. I just closed the doc, but Real Betis had signed Danielson for a world record fee. And a year later, Real Madrid signed Elver Balic for 5 million euros more than that. And Balic played 11 games, and no one really knew who this guy was. And it was very strange. That's a weird blip on his radar.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy, like 2 years later, when they get to the final in Paris, that only like four of the starting 11 played in Amsterdam. So, I mean, practically, I mean, not completely, but practically rebuilt the team twice in that sense. He rebuilt it in 95, 96 when he brought in the players that would win it here, and then did it again. Maybe it was unjustified given some of the profile of players. I mean, Mijatovic went off to I think it was Florentina shortly after this game, but I mean, did it twice more or less, which is incredible for as we can speak for now, is incredible for an incredible achievement.
So back to Roberto Carlos versus Marcelo for a second. Roberto Carlos, I know he gets if Marcelo gets a bad rap for defense, you know, Roberto Carlos did too. Not nearly as badly as Marcelo, but he was definitely known as being an offensive-minded fullback. It's worth noting that Roberto Carlos, you know, and this game is definitely part of it, but it's more of a larger point. You know, excellent step-up interventions in this game. His passing was pretty good. He had some flying tackles to make up for some bad giveaways that Real Madrid had in this game, intercepting passes. Defensively, he's good in the sense that if you size him up 1-versus-1 with somebody, he's usually coming out with the ball at his feet cleanly in that position. And if he's out of position, which was quite often, in this game maybe not as much, he was a little bit more conservative because he didn't, you know, Delivio was on that side and, you know, they didn't want to expose themselves too much defensively. He can track like a MFer. And so Marcelo doesn't have that trait. And that's just kind of what we're talking about. Like, I feel like the well-roundedness of Roberto Carlos is definitely a point in his favor.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I mean, Delivio was one of the better players for Juve kind of in the first half anyways. He was definitely one of the more prevalent attackers on the team, so Roberto Carlos certainly managed his threat very well as the game wore on.